There comes a moment in every life when, without any warning, something within us breaks. It's not sadness, it's not anger, it's something more profound, something that feels like the soul itself is exhausted, tired of carrying the weight of other people's expectations, tired of holding on to relationships that deplete us, tired of squeezing into roles and spaces that no longer fit. This is the moment Carl Jung spoke of, the beginning of the real individuation process. It's when the mask finally slips away and the authentic self begins to surface. But what's surprising is how quietly this shift arrives. There are no dramatic signs, no marked date on a calendar that says, "Today is the day you free yourself." It shows up unannounced, right when you need it most. It follows countless nights of convincing yourself things will improve. That maybe if you tried harder, changed a little more, ignored that heavy feeling in your chest telling you something's wrong, then maybe things would fall into place. But they never do. Nothing ever truly fits. Then one day, in the midst of emotional exhaustion, a decision is made, the choice to say no more. For Jung, this isn't just a random reaction, it's a message from the unconscious, a long, silent scream finally heard. It marks the start of a journey from which there is no return, because once you decide to let go of what no longer fits, and once you commit to walking toward what feels true, you can't go back. The old self begins to dissolve. In its place, someone new begins to rise, someone stronger, more conscious, and unmistakably more you. Many misunderstand this process. They think saying no more is an act of defiance, but it isn't. It's an act of self-love, not an ending, but a beginning. Still, why is it so hard? Why, even when we recognize the harm, do we struggle to let go? Jung offered a painful but accurate explanation. We've built our identities around the very things that hurt us. Maybe you haven't noticed, but for years you've been telling yourself the same story. You've justified your pain with phrases like, "That's just life, I can't change it," or "Maybe I deserve this." Over time, your unconscious has accepted these beliefs as facts, and these beliefs have shaped your reality. You've remained in relationships that offer nothing back, in jobs that crush your spirit, in situations that constantly drain you. The worst part, a part of you now believes this is normal, that life is supposed to feel this way, but it's not. Jung taught that the soul is always evolving, and that evolution means shedding what no longer aligns with who we are. But to evolve, we must face something deeply uncomfortable: our shadow. The shadow is everything you've repressed, everything you were told to hide. Your buried desires, emotions, and thoughts, the parts of you deemed unacceptable. But shadows don't vanish by being ignored. In fact, they surface in subtle, persistent ways, in your repeated behaviors, painful relationships, unexplained anxiety. And so when you say no more, you confront your shadow directly. You challenge the internal framework that's kept you stuck. In many ways, you undergo a kind of death so that a new version of you can be born. That's why it's painful. That's why it's hard, because you're not just letting go of a person, a job, or a situation. You're releasing a version of yourself, one that's been with you for years, one that felt safe, even if it hurt, but it no longer serves you. When you finally let go, the unconscious reacts. Fear surfaces, doubts creep in. You question if you made the right call. This is the point where many people turn back. But here's the truth. Fear doesn't mean you've made a mistake. It means you're changing. The unconscious wants safety, predictability. But your soul wants transformation. And here begins the real internal struggle between the comfort of the old and the uncertainty of the new. But if you persist, if you hold your ground through the storm, something incredible starts to happen. You begin reclaiming your energy. Jung described this as a kind of psychic rebirth. For years, your energy was scattered, tied up in situations that stunted your growth. Every time you tolerated something that felt wrong, you gave away part of your vitality. every time you swallowed. Your emotions for fear of rejection, you drifted further from your essence. But once you choose to let go, all of that energy begins to return. It's almost magical. What once felt impossible becomes clear. What once caused pain begins to lose power. What once seemed necessary now feels irrelevant. And then something unexpected happens. You begin to experience a love unlike any other, self-love. This love doesn't rely on praise or validation. It doesn't seek approval. It grows from within, from the certainty that you are enough just as you are, and when that love takes root, your entire world shifts. You stop searching outwardly for what's always been inside. You stop settling for fragments of love and attention, because you finally understand your value. You stop waiting to be rescued, because you realize you've always had the power to save yourself, and it's at that moment, when you truly stand in your worth, that things start to align. Not because the universe is suddenly rewarding you, but because you're finally in sync with your true self. Relationships shift, new paths open, opportunities appear, not because you're chasing them, but because you're being authentic. But even this isn't the final step. Once you've discovered true self-love, the real work begins. You start to see the world differently. You can no longer ignore the things you once excused. It's like waking up after years of sleep. Suddenly, everything looks different. What once felt normal now seems intolerable. You begin to see people as they are, not as you hoped they would be. For years, you tried to change others, believing that if you just loved enough, were patient enough, gave enough, you'd finally be seen and valued. Now you understand the truth. It was never your job to fix anyone. Jung explained that when people avoid confronting their own shadows, they project their pain onto others. That's why toxic relationship patterns repeat. If in the past you became someone's emotional dumping ground, it wasn't your failure. It was because you hadn't yet recognized your own worth. You weren't there to save them. You were there to learn how to save yourself. And when you say no more, when you break that cycle, people's true colors emerge. Some will respond with anger. Some will guilt-trip you or tell you that you've changed. And they're right, you have changed. You're no longer the person who tolerated what shouldn't have been tolerated. You're no longer silent out of fear. Self-love isn't fleeting. It's the foundation for everything you build going forward. But to cement it, you'll face the hardest test, solitude. Letting go leaves a void, a space once filled by painful but familiar things. And in that space, fear shows up. Fear that you've made a mistake, that you'll always be alone, that maybe nothing better will come. But Jung reminded us, transformation doesn't bring comfort. It brings change, and change always starts with chaos. You might feel nostalgic. You'll miss certain things, not because they were good, but because you haven't yet adjusted to freedom. That sense of loss is temporary, because deep down, you know one thing with certainty. You can never go back to who you were before you woke up. And in that knowing, something extraordinary begins. You attract different things, not out of desperation, but because you've changed from the inside out. Jung said that our outer world reflects our inner state. When you were broken, when you didn't value yourself, your life mirrored that belief. But now, with self-worth rooted deep within, everything starts to shift. People who once felt right no longer fit, not because you've rejected them, but because they no longer align. Situations you once tolerated now feel unbearable, and instead of wondering if you're asking too much, you realize you're finally setting healthy standards. You don't accept less anymore, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for yourself. And this is where many people falter. They think growth is linear, but it's not. Some days feel like progress, others like setbacks, but the goal isn't to avoid uncertainty. It's to trust the process. Everything you've outgrown was never meant to be permanent. The pain, fear, loneliness, they aren't signs of failure. They're signs of evolution. So if you feel like you're lost in the middle of a storm, remember this. The version of you who accepted less, who settled, who played small, that version is gone. You're not lost, you're becoming, and that is the most powerful transformation of all. Jung believed the biggest obstacle to self-discovery is our fear of emptiness. And it's true. Emptiness is uncomfortable, even frightening, but what no one ever teaches us is that emptiness is sacred. It's the space where transformation begins. If you rush to fill it, if you cling to the familiar just to avoid discomfort, you'll miss what was meant for you. That's why, after choosing to say no more, you didn't always have this clarity. But once you commit to growth, once self-love becomes your foundation, you gain a new ability, the capacity to see truth without distortion. And the truth is simple. Anything that demands you sacrifice your peace does not belong in your life. Relationship that requires you to diminish who you are isn't love. It's confinement disguised as connection. This is where many get stuck, confusing attachment for love. They assume that missing someone means they still need them, but more often it's simply the fading of an old emotional pattern. Missing something doesn't mean your decision was wrong. It means your mind is recalibrating, and your subconscious is releasing years of conditioning. True growth isn't measured by how much pain you feel after walking away, but by what you choose to do with the space left behind. If you rush to fill the void with temporary relief, you'll repeat old cycles. But if you use that space to reconnect with yourself, to go inward and align with your real desires, then you're preparing for something entirely new. Life responds to the energy you emit. When you're hurting, you attract from fear and lack. But once you find peace within, everything changes. Relationships are no longer based on the fear of being alone, but on authentic connection. You stop settling for less because you no longer feel starved for love. What you give now comes from fullness, not emptiness, and that shift changes everything. One of the most powerful aspects of this journey is what happens when you stop looking outside yourself for what's always been within. Suddenly, everything starts falling into place. Synchronicities, what Jung described so insightfully, begin to appear in your life. You stop feeling like you're swimming upstream because things begin to flow. Answers you once desperately arrive exactly when needed. The right people enter your life naturally. And most importantly, you stop being afraid. When you truly know your worth, when you've tasted the power of unconditional self-respect, you understand that no one ever gets to define you again. No one can mold you or make you feel inadequate. External validation loses its grip because your inner validation becomes immovable. This is the moment your transformation becomes real. You no longer have anything to prove. You stop seeking the world's approval because you've accepted yourself. You've faced your shadow, learned your lessons, and now carry a sense of grounded confidence you never had before. It's a peace that can't be described. It can only be felt. And then something interesting happens. People from your past may try to return, not because they've changed, but because they sense they no longer have power over you. Where they once manipulated, they now see resilience. Where they once played with your emotions, they realize they can't shake you anymore. It's not hatred. It's not revenge. It's clarity. They're seeing something that was always there, your strength. The only difference is now you see it too. Now you know who you are. Now you know what you deserve. And once you reach that point, there's no going back. You no longer feel the need to explain or justify yourself. You simply are. And that is the ultimate victory. Because when self-love becomes your foundation, life stops being a battle and starts becoming creation. You no longer stay stuck in patterns of suffering. You no longer keep repeating the same emotional wounds. Now you make conscious choices about what to allow into your life. You've realized everything around you is a mirror of what you believe you deserve. And now you truly know your worth. That's the essence of self-love. It's not about being flawless or never doubting. It's about knowing deep down that you will never again settle for less than what aligns with your truth. Because ultimately, it all comes down to a choice: to keep living for others' expectations, or to live the life your heart actually desires. The moment you fully realize your worth is the moment everything changes. It's like waking up from a long illusion, one that kept you locked in pain, unhealthy relationships, and a distorted view of love. And when you finally know that nothing and no one can make you question your value again, everything starts to shift. At first, it might feel unfamiliar. You're used to the struggle, justifying the unacceptable, postponing peace in the hope things will improve. But now, with this clarity, you can't ignore the signs anymore. You can't betray yourself, and that changes you, not your essence, but your alignment with it. Some people may say you've changed, and they're right. You're no longer willing to participate in what you once tolerated. You're done justifying a lack of effort. You no longer try to fit where you aren't. Welcomed. Because now you know, every time you ignored your intuition, you were choosing suffering. Jung once said, when we suppress truth, the unconscious will bring it to the surface, through dreams, physical symptoms, anxiety, or emptiness. For years you ignored these signs, assuming they were normal. But now, you understand. They never were. It was never normal to carry emotional burdens. It was never okay to silence your instincts to make others comfortable. Now you listen. Now you recognize what your soul's been whispering all along. Most importantly, you trust yourself. And that's the core of real self-love. Not a cliché, but a deep, unwavering trust that your feelings are valid, that you deserve better, that you don't need to hold on to what no longer nourishes you. When you learn to respect yourself, life mirrors that back. Not because you became stronger by force, but because you stopped settling. And the most surprising part, you don't have to fight for it. It's an energetic shift. When you raise your standards, the people who once took advantage of your lower self-worth naturally fall away. They can't manipulate you anymore. They can't project their chaos onto you, and if they try, they quickly discover you've changed. Some feel fear, not because they want to return to who they were, but because the space left behind after letting go of toxicity can be daunting. Doubt may creep in. You may question your decisions. But in those moments, remember one truth. Self-love doesn't feel like sudden bliss. It feels like inner peace. The peace you once sought in others is now something you generate within. It's no longer tied to what someone does or doesn't do. Because now you understand the most important relationship is the one you have with yourself. And that changes everything. Challenges don't disappear. Temptations to regress may still arise. But the difference is, now you can tell what's real and what's just an illusion from your past. You don't need to explain or defend your worth. You simply know it, you feel it, you live it. That's the real shift. Because when you start living from that place where self-love is your natural state, everything changes. You're no longer trying to impress anyone. You don't need validation. You're no longer obsessed with being understood. You realize that not everyone will be ready for this transformation. Some will say you've changed too much, that you're different now, and they'll be right. But what they may not grasp is, you didn't change to fit in. You changed because you finally broke free. When you live with self-respect, your energy shifts. What once triggered you no longer holds power. You stop reacting to manipulation. You stop being weighed down by guilt. You stop allowing indecisive people to disrupt your clarity. And that clarity, that certainty, is your true strength. Life becomes simpler, not because it's free of obstacles, but because now you know what's worth your time and what's not. You no longer force what doesn't flow. You no longer view resistance as a test to overcome. You see it for what it is, a sign that it's not your path. And when you reach this level of awareness, something amazing happens. You no longer want to go back, because everything comes down to one decision: to keep repeating painful patterns or to step into a new reality. You've already made that choice. Never again will you ignore your intuition. Never again will you settle. Never again will you let anyone define your value. Because now you understand something that changes everything. Self-love is not a destination. It's a path, and you are finally walking it. When you embrace the kind of self-love that begins with a final no more, there is no returning to what once hurt you. What used to feel like an internal war now becomes a steady clarity. You no longer need validation to know your worth. You already have it. And that's the secret. The world responds to your energy. Now that you've returned to yourself, now that you've learned to release what no longer belongs, life starts to mirror that back. When you move with confidence, free from the fears and doubts that once kept you small, everything genuine begins to find you. Maybe before you couldn't understand why others moved forward while you felt stuck. But now you see clearly. Life wasn't against you. You were just holding on to things that no longer belonged. Now you get it. Everything you experienced, every loss, every struggle was leading you here, to this moment, to the point where you finally recognize yourself, choose yourself, and begin to live in alignment with your truth. And this is when the real magic begins. Because when you change, everything around you shifts. When you raise your standards, the universe responds with opportunities, people, and experiences that match your new level of awareness. And all of this begins with one simple decision: to never again settle for less than what you truly deserve. So now that you've found this clarity, do one thing. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who's still stuck in a cycle you've already broken, because what you now understand has the power to free them too.